This module will discuss problem statements, which are products from long-range planning that feed into the NEPA and merger processes. The problem statement for each project is used to form the basis for purpose and need, which is the first concurrence point in the merger process. Purpose and need will be covered in the next module. However, this information on problem statements will be important to review prior to discussing purpose and need in more detail. This module will provide an overview of integration, which is process improvement that initiated the development of problem statements in long-range transportation planning, the elements of a problem statement and how they are used in transportation planning and in project development, what goes into developing a problem statement, and references for more information about problem statements. Integration is an initiative led by NCDOT that started with a streamlining grant from FHWA. It is a process improvement effort to develop a seamless connection between long-range transportation planning and project development. The ultimate goal is to support the timely delivery of quality projects by providing useful information from long-range planning. This process was developed by an interagency team and is now in the implementation phase. In order to develop the concepts for integration, the team considered the question, what information from long-range planning, if it's developed using quality data and is well documented, could be useful in project development and could prevent rework? The team organized their recommendations around topic areas called linkages, such as the problem statement to purpose and need linkage that we are talking about today. The problem statement linkage has been fully developed and is currently being implemented. Problem statements have been created and used for purpose and need since 2010. There are interagency teams currently working on best practices and procedures for the other linkages, alternatives analysis, land use to indirect and cumulative effects, and public involvement. Recommendations from these teams are expected, after which training and implementation will begin. Using this information from integration can help the NEPA or merger process move along more seamlessly, particularly in the first part of the process, for purpose and need and initial development of alternatives. Integration is closely related to another improvement initiative, streamlining. Streamlining is an effort initiated by NCDOT and FHWA to examine the merger process and determine how it can be conducted more efficiently. One of the principles of streamlining is to use these products and information from long-range planning, such as problem statement. Streamlining will be discussed more fully later in Module 13. One of the key groups supporting and overseeing integration is the Interagency Leadership Team, or ILT. This group has already been mentioned in an earlier module related to their role in the merger process. Integration ties into the ILT's goals related to early coordination in long-range planning and improving the project development process. The ILT has endorsed the problem statement guidance and the use of problem statements for developing purpose and need. The problem statement forms the basis for purpose and need in the merger process, but it is also useful in long-range planning in defining and communicating project proposals for the long-range transportation plan. Problem statements are used to communicate the context, concept, and justification or need for all proposed projects in the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, or CTP, in Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs, and it may be called the Long-Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP. A long-range transportation plan is generally done for a large geographic area and contains dozens or even hundreds of project proposals. In urban areas, the plan is developed for an entire MPO, which usually includes multiple jurisdictions and sometimes multiple counties. An example of an MPO is the Rocky Mount urban area, which extends beyond the city to the area expected to be urban 20 to 30 years in the future. Larger examples of MPOs are the Capital Area, or Raleigh, and Mecklenburg Union, or Charlotte. In rural areas, a long-range plan is usually done for at least an entire county. The long-range plans for these areas must cover transportation needs for at least 20 years into the future. There is federal legislation that requires long-range metropolitan transportation plans for MPOs, which most areas in North Carolina call the Long-Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP. There is also state legislation establishing transportation planning for all areas, urban or rural. This plan is called the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, or CTP. Most urban areas are moving toward combining their LRTP and CTP into a single transportation planning document, which would contain the problem statement. The CTP maps are officially adopted by the Board of Transportation at NCDOT and either the MPO in urban areas or the municipalities and counties in rural areas with endorsement by the Rural Planning Organization, or RPO. Whether the area is urban or rural, the transportation plan is presented by a set of maps and a document or report. It is in this report that the problem statements for the various project proposals in an area are captured. So back to why do we need problem statements? They are intended to form the core for the purpose and need and save time in preparing and agreeing to the purpose and need in merger. We expect that using problem statements will make it easier to develop quality purpose and need documentation because the concept for a project usually originates in long-range planning, so information about the need from the project should come directly from there as well. There is also federal support and encouragement to link long-range planning and NEPA. The benefits of linking long-range planning and NEPA were originally included in Safety Law. An appendix in the Code of Federal Regulations includes more specific information about linkage concepts, and a legal guidance document was developed that includes further information in a question and answer format. The new transportation bill, MAP 21, stays the course in continuing encouragement to states to link planning and NEPA. Problem statement is the first linkage between long-range transportation planning and NEPA to be implemented in North Carolina. The following are highlights of what's included in the appendix of the Code of Federal Regulations. It states that the results and decisions from transportation planning may be used as part of the overall project development process consistent with NEPA. It goes on to list the types of information that may be shared. The first one they describe as purpose and need or goals and objective statements is what we are calling problem statements. Other information to be shared includes the general travel corridor and modes, information about the environmental setting, and preliminary identification of environmental impacts and possible mitigation. Information related to these topics can be found in the Long-Range Transportation Plan, or CTP. The federal legislation encourages that this information be shared and provides certain conditions that have to be met for the information to be used in NEPA. For instance, the analysis must be based on quality data and appropriate coordination and public involvement must occur. Problem statements are organized in two sections, with the subsections that you see listed here. The first main section is the identified problem and contains information about the need for improvements and purpose any improvements should serve. It also contains information about the community's vision and goals and objectives and any history of the problem, such as how the need has increased over time and how it's been included on prior plans. This first section contains no references to proposed solutions. The second section is the CTP project proposal. This is where the long-range planner documents information about the specific project proposal as included on the adopted long-range plan, or CTP. If alternatives have been studied in detail, information about the alternatives analysis is contained in an appendix of the CTP report. The problem statement focuses specifically on the project proposal as shown on the adopted plan. This section includes information about the environmental context based on the GIS-based environmental screening that is done during long-range planning. The relationship of the proposed project to local land use plans is described. Linkages to other plans and nearby projects is documented. Other modes recommended to be included in the corridor and interactions or intersections with other modal facilities or plans are described. And specific information on public involvement related to a given project proposal is provided. The problem statement only contains information specific to the proposed projects on the adopted plan. For example, the public involvement section only includes specific comments or feedback related to the project. General information about public involvement during long-range planning, such as the number and locations of meetings, is provided elsewhere in the CTP report. This is because it would be cumbersome to repeat general information in every problem statement for the dozens or more projects in each long-range plan. Also, the goal is to keep the problem statement as concise and specific to the given project proposal as possible. Other examples of general information found elsewhere in the report include the analysis methodology used for the planning study and general land use information. Looking at the two main sections of the problem statement structure, the first section, Identified Problem, most directly correlates to the purpose and need that will be developed in the merger process. It focuses just on the need and purpose for improvements and does not contain any information on the specific project proposal. The information can be pulled from the CTP project proposal section as needed and will also be useful when discussing alternatives in the merger process. Problem statements are written by someone directly involved in the long-range planning study, usually someone at NCDOT's Transportation Planning Branch or the MPO, with help and coordination from RPOs and local governments. Additional coordination occurs with NCDOT's Project Development and Environmental Analysis Unit, or PDEA, in that full problem statements are reviewed by the project development staff. This is critically important, especially during this time when we are first implementing problem statements. Long-range planners are learning how to best construct problem statements to make them as useful as possible in project development. Feedback from PDEA has been very helpful in allowing us to monitor how we are doing. This is a good point to explain what a full problem statement is. As mentioned earlier, long-range plans, or CTPs, have dozens or even hundreds of projects. There is not enough time or resources in long-range planning to develop full problem statements for all of these proposals. So standards have been defined for full problem statements and minimum problem statements. Basically, this means that a minimum problem statement is developed for every proposal in a plan. Then, certain project proposals are selected in order to write full problem statements. Long-range planners try to write full problem statements for projects that are the largest impacting ones, meaning they are large in scale, such as new location and major widenings, and those that are the closest in time to being implemented or funded. A minimum problem statement contains the basic information about the need for the project proposal and may only be a paragraph or two long. A full problem statement may be several pages long and contains more detailed information about the need and the associated study of the proposed project. And finally, who is coordinated with during problem statement development. While there is not outreach specifically related to problem statements, there is coordination with agencies as well as public involvement as part of the overall planning process. In the long-range planning, or CTP process, there are specific public involvement plans that are developed and followed for the study. It varies from study to study, but usually there is some type of committee or group of local representatives that is worked with closely throughout the process. Additionally, there are usually specific outreach efforts during at least 3 or 4 points in the process. The first one is during the visioning process and the establishment of goals and objectives. Information from this phase is used in the problem statement. The second public outreach is usually around identifying deficiencies and development of possible solutions. At this point, the core information that will go into the problem statement is shown. Then, public meetings, usually in drop-in session format, are held on the draft transportation plan, and formal public meetings are held prior to adoption of the plan. Agency representatives also have opportunity for input during this process. NCDOT is currently working with the various state and federal resources agencies to develop and formalize best practices about how agencies should be coordinated with during long-range planning. Besides just being good practice and providing valuable information, this public outreach and agency coordination is important because it is one of the conditions in the federal legislation for long-range planning products to be used in NEPA. Problem statements are generally developed during the long-range planning process when the long-range plan or CTP is being developed or updated. In MPO areas, federal legislation requires that the long-range plan be updated every 4 or 5 years, depending on their air quality status. In rural areas, we try to update plans approximately every 10 years or so, but it varies greatly based on need and available resources. And again, project proposals are prioritized, and full problem statements are only written for those projects largest in scale and closest to being implemented. There is a mechanism where development of a full problem statement can be requested if one does not exist. From the perspective of those in project development, if you are starting the merger process for a project and the long-range plan does not contain a full problem statement, you can request through the Transportation Planning Branch that one be developed. It's been discussed why problem statements are developed, what information they contain, who develops them, and when they are developed. How problem statements are used will be reviewed. As discussed in long-range planning, problem statements are the basis for documenting needs and developing solutions. They help communicate information about improvement proposals during the development or update of the long-range plan. Problem statements are also used in the prioritization process, where projects are prioritized for funding. Information from the problem statement is used to demonstrate the need for certain projects relative to other requests. For a local area representative to enter a project into the prioritization system to request funding, a problem statement is required to be attached. Finally, as discussed, problem statements are intended to be used in the merger process to form the foundation for the purpose and need. This information is generally shared around the time of the internal scoping meeting. Principles to be followed in writing a problem also apply to developing purpose and need. These principles are communicated through the acrostic SMART. They are that a problem statement should be specific, measurable, agreed to, realistic, and time-bound. Specific means that a problem statement should define the particular problem or need in a detailed way. If possible, the problem statement should be measurable, so that it can be used during evaluation of alternatives to determine whether certain proposals meet the need. The problem statement is agreed upon in the long-range planning process, and the purpose and need is ultimately more formally agreed upon as a concurrence point in the merger process. The problem statement may contain a target or goal, if appropriate, and this target should be realistic and time-bound. So, for example, instead of just saying travel needs to be improved on a certain road, it would be better to state the need is to reduce congestion on the given road so that LOSE is achieved by 2035. Along with the SMART principles, we craft problem statements with specific potential purposes in mind. So, if the problem statement is being developed during the long-range planning process, at the point where it is written, the deficiency analysis has already been conducted for the area. So, specific transportation needs are known, and next, work is going to be done to develop specific solutions to the needs. But before solutions are developed, it is important to identify the purpose any solution would need to serve. In identifying potential purposes, this diagram shows that there are 11 categories of purposes that transportation projects can serve. For example, congestion and safety are two of the most common purposes. So the decision process being shown on this slide is that you consider the potential purposes for the problem statement to be developed, and you only use those purposes for which you have supporting data. Also, it is best to really try to focus on the single primary purpose for the proposal. Identifying the primary purpose for a proposal means determining the real driver and need for improvements. If there are one or two other purposes that need to be included, they are called other desirable outcomes. The point is to keep the problem statement simple and focused on the primary purpose. Here are the 11 categories of potential purposes. Again, congestion and safety are used frequently. Facility deficiencies and need for access or system linkage are also often drivers of the need for improvements. And you see various other categories listed. There is FHWA purpose and need guidance for North Carolina that goes into these potential purposes in more detail and covers the type of data that may be used to support each. The reference for this guide will be given at the end of this module. You'll also hear more about some of these purposes in the Purpose and Need module of this training. Here are highlights of some of the differences between problem statements and purpose and need. The data in a problem statement may not be as detailed as what is ultimately included in purpose and need. Also, depending on the age of the long-range plan, the data from the problem statement may need to be updated before it is used for purpose and need. However, it is important to note that just because information in a problem statement may be old, it doesn't necessarily mean it is outdated or no good. If there hasn't been a major change in conditions, the problem would still exist, though the magnitude of the problem may have increased. As we covered earlier, public involvement and opportunity for agency input does occur for problem statement during the long-range plan study. But it is only technically required for purpose and need and occurs in a more specific way in merger. For instance, the formal concurrence points in merger result in the purpose and need being formally agreed upon. Finally, the problem statement does contain a recommendation or project proposal, but it is contained only in the second section, called CTP Project Proposal. The first section of the problem statement is the identified problem and most closely correlates to the purpose and need. A final point is that the long-range planning process calls for appropriate coordination to occur concerning projects that are already underway in the merger process. For instance, if a project is already underway in merger, the long-range plan just references that project and does not document a problem statement separately to avoid any potential conflicts with a purpose and need that may already be underway. On this slide, references are given to more information on integration and problem statement. The problem statement site contains various documents for procedures and guidance. There are also tips lists for those developing problem statements and frequently asked questions for those using problem statements in project development. As I've mentioned, problem statements have been produced for a couple of years now, and there is continued coordination occurring between Transportation Planning Branch, PDEA, and the MPOs and RPOs to ensure problem statements are as useful as possible. In the next module, purpose and need will be discussed in more detail.